Since the inception of combat sports, Russia has always held a spot at the top of the mountain as contenders for most dominant. Whether it's in wrestling, with legendary Alexander Karelin holding almost a decade-long reign in dominance as an Olympic competitor, and even longer reign during the annual World Championships. In boxing, with recent dominant championship fighters such as Sergey the Crusher Kovalev and Dmitry Bivol, or in MMA, with all-time greats such as Fedor the Last Emperor Emelianenko, and most recently, Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov, establishing themselves in the record books as potential kings in the world of combat. Cold, calculated, ruthless tacticians, inside, and if necessary, outside the ring. Unfortunately though, alongside the inception of combat sports, comes with the unavoidable association of questionable figures and organizations. Whether it was in the Far East, behind the scenes, where the Yakuza would operate and run, at the time, the biggest MMA organization in the world in Pride Fighting Championships, or just south of the border, where in 1993, Mexico's greatest boxer and Julio Cesar Chavez would make his ring walkout against Greg Hagen, being accompanied by Francisco Rafael Arellano Felix. Arellano, at the time, was one of the heads of Mexico's largest and most dangerous cartel in the Tijuana cartel. Or even here in the United States, where during the 1940s and 50s, notorious mob enforcer Frankie Carbo, a soldier for the Lucchese crime family and gunman for the infamous Murder Inc., would enter the world of professional boxing as a promoter, rumored to influence the outcomes of multiple championship fights, as well as promoting Hall of Fame heavyweight Sonny Liston. In this video though, we're going to stay in Russia, where the Russian mob has an open affinity for combat sports. A well-known example being Alexander Emelianenko, brother of Fedor Emelianenko, widely speculated of being a member of the Russian mafia because of his tattoos before altering them later on. Between the years of 2010 and 2012, a 13-minute video surfaced on the internet showing 4 fights between one individual and 4 other opponents, all of them ending in the same way, but with each fight progressively getting more ruthless and brutal than the previous. The winner of all 4 fights is Ruslan Yakubov, former professional boxer before turning into an enforcer for the Russian mafia. While not the best professional, amassing a record of 4 wins with 11 losses, Yakubov was still a professional nonetheless, with years of actual training and experience in the ring. This combination against a large majority of the population that is untrained and not nearly as experienced in combat is extremely dangerous, and will show in the video of discussion. While the quality is far from perfect, the video takes place in a gymnasium. There are multiple onlookers as the video quickly picks up in the middle of the first fight. Out of the 4 fights, this one was the least violent and merciful, if that can be said. The first opponent doesn't put up much of a fight, as he's visibly outmatched and terrified. 2 hard punches resulting in 2 separate knockdowns, each knockdown being followed up with Vale Tudo-style stomps and kicks to the head before the next fight commences. The second opponent puts up more of a fight, resulting in what seems to be more of a brutal punishment. The fight lasts a little over a minute before the second opponent ultimately falls, and this is where it gets unforgivably brutal. After getting the best of the second opponent and knocking him out, Ruslan proceeds to stomp and kick the knocked out opponent periodically for over a minute. Now again, even though the quality of the footage is pretty bad, it seems at a certain point into the head stomps and kicks, the man's body goes into what is called decorticate posturing. Decorticate posture is an abnormal posture your body goes into due to severe damage done to the person's brain. The posturing is unmistakable, and if the body goes into this posture, the person should receive medical attention as soon as possible. Now, even though the man is in this posture, it doesn't stop Ruslan from continuing to kick and stomp the man to the point where the victim lets out a disturbing moan, as if he wants the beating to stop, but has no way of stopping it. The victim is eventually dragged away by another man, and Ruslan would return to the first victim, who's still lying on the floor, turtled up, and proceeds to give him more kicks and stomps to the head before the third fight begins. The third opponent lasts around the same amount of time as the second opponent, maybe even a little less. He eventually gets bested, getting dropped by a straight right hand. While he's on the ground, he tries to raise his hands in an attempt to prevent from getting hit anymore, but unfortunately for him, it does little to nothing. He continues to get hit repeatedly with punches before going out. In a vicious trend of the video, Ruslan proceeds to ferociously stomp the man's chest and head continuously. This goes on for around 30 seconds until the man's limp, seemingly lifeless body is dragged away out of the gym. After a brief idle period, there's one more fight. The fourth fight, and subsequent beating is the worst part of the video. The fourth opponent is hands down the most skilled and gives Ruslan his toughest fight. The fight lasts around 4 minutes, with the last opponent even landing some decent shots before gradually breaking down and succumbing to exhaustion. It was then that Ruslan would land a solid cross, putting the man down before proceeding to kick and stomp his head to the point of unconsciousness. And much like the previous opponents, Ruslan would still continue to stomp and kick the man's body and head, but this time into a bloody, battered mess, eventually leaving the man moaning to stop, much like the second opponent, until he eventually regains consciousness, and the video ends soon after. Apparently, the last opponent passed away in the hospital due to complications in the brain. These fights were apparently set up in a form of intimidation, as well as a chance for the individuals to settle their debt. Beat Ruslan, your debt is paid. Fight Ruslan, pay half of what you owe. Interestingly enough, this wasn't the first time this has happened. Apparently, Ruslan and his accomplices, as a form of violent intimidation and an attempt to extort, would bring in debtors and those who they thought should be punished to fight Ruslan. Ruslan would later go on to be arrested and tried for murder, but not for the fourth man he fought in the video. In 2008, a man by the name of Alexander Mikhailov, a security guard for one of the places Ruslan and his accomplices were trying to extort, was taken to the gymnasium and severely beaten. A few months later, Mikhailov would make an appointment at a city center and saw that the men were waiting there with weapons en masse. Scared, Mikhailov would try to run away, but he was eventually caught, shot, and beaten with bats. He too would later die from injuries in the hospital. Ruslan received a sentence of 8 years, along with his accomplices. But one of the most surprising things is that you wouldn't have to look far to find this video, as it was uploaded on YouTube back in 2018 under the title Brutalny Ruslan Yakubov. And as far as street fight footages, this is definitely one of the most ruthless I've seen, and just another brutal reminder of the harsh realities of the world.